Ladies and gentlemen, call this meeting to order, the Mayor and Board of Commissioners for May 13th, 2025. Can I get the roll call, please?
Pauline Braun, Emily Kleiner,
Here.
Mayor Marion,
Here.
Dave Warnick,
Here.
Will you rise with me for the pledge of... Oh, sorry.
Augie Pearson.
Here.
Let the record show you have a quorum.
Thank you. Will you rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You bow your heads with me for a brief prayer. Father God, I come to you tonight on behalf of our town, Lord. I ask that you watch over our citizens, watch over our elected body, God, and their families. Be with us as we're here tonight and as we leave. Please watch over our police officers and our emergency services, as well as our troops serving here and overseas. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, moving forward, consent agenda. Town Administrator, do you have that?
Yes, you have the approval of the April 8th, 2025 town meeting video summary, and then a listing of the next 4 upcoming town meetings, which all start at 5:30 p.m.
Well, since we were having a discussion about the upcoming town meeting in July, before this, are we, we're saying that July 8th isn't gonna work?
Do you want to announce it at a sooner date? We'll just say that the July 8th meeting is going to be rescheduled, and then we'll try to pick a new date for it.
Technically, you can leave it the way it is.
Okay.
The way it is right now.
Is your mic on? Check that mic. Might be underneath you.
There it goes.
You could leave it the way it is, because you still have another meeting in June.
Schedule,
And
okay.
in the
Okay.
meantime, we can coordinate schedules to try to find the right date.
Fair enough. I move to approve the consent agenda.
Seconded.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Consent agenda passes. Moving forward, there is no public presentations or any unfinished business. Moving forward into new business. Resolution 2025-11. Town Administrator, do you have that?
Yes, I do. So what you have before you is a resolution that would make changes to the town's personnel manual. And the changes are born out of new regulations that have come down from MOSH, which is basically the Maryland version of OSHA standards. And those standards are now talking about policies that we need to have in place to manage and identify heat illness of our employees that work outside, provide them adequate water during those times, and then basically a cooling off period when they become overheated or work in excessive heat. And then to also have some policies in place, for instance, that the employee, if they're not feeling well, can step up and say, hey, I'm not feeling well, and it gives some direction for the supervisor to properly manage that. This is all born out of basically OSHA requirements coming down from the state. So we have Judy, the Assistant Town Administrator, put together a framework of a plan, and we modified it a little bit, but basically that's what's in the resolution. If you'd like, I'd read that into the minutes.
Please. Thank you.
So you have Resolution 2025-11. I'll skip the first 2 boilerplates. I'll summarize the third boilerplate, which is basically the standard language that talks about how our personnel manual is created, what its intent is, and then the subject matter typically in a personnel manual, and then how you go about changing it. And then the fourth boilerplate, basically I'll start from there, whereas the town of Rising Sun recognizes that as climate patterns change and summer temperatures increase, employees, particularly those in public works and outdoor service roles, are increasingly exposed to dangerous heat conditions that pose significant health and safety risks. Whereas in response to these changing conditions and in alignment with the Maryland Occupational Safety and Health, MOSH, guidelines, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA best practices, and the University of Maryland Heat Safety Program, the administration has developed a heat illness prevention and management policy designed to safeguard employees working in elevated heat index conditions. And whereas the policy establishes clear procedures, responsibilities, and training requirements to reduce the risk of heat-related illness, ensuring employees have the knowledge, tools, and support necessary to perform their duties safely during periods of extreme heat. And whereas the mayor and commissioners wish to formally adopt this policy to further protect the health and welfare of town employees and ensure compliance with applicable safety standards, therefore be it enacted and resolved that the mayor and commissioners of the town of Rising Sun hereby adopt the document titled Section 6-20 Heat Illness Prevention and Management Policy as attached hereto, and direct that it be formally incorporated into and made an official section of the town of Rising Sun's personnel rules and regulations to be included as Section 6-20 of the proposed manual. And that is being potentially voted on tonight. When you get to the actual section of 620, there's basically a purpose here at the beginning that obviously is to help protect employees from heat-related illnesses. This policy comes into play, and the way it reads is applicability. This policy applies to all employees who work indoors or outdoors where the heat index equals or exceeds 80 degrees Fahrenheit for more than 15 consecutive minutes per hour. Additional requirements apply when the heat index reaches 90 degrees Fahrenheit or above. We put some definitions in here, the definition for heat index, a definition for light work, moderate work, and heavy work. You can see that. There are some policy requirements, the supervisor's responsibilities. Supervisors, example, public works manager, department head shall monitor daily heat index levels using the NIOSH heat app or NSS heat risk map, adjust hydration and rest schedules in real time based on heat index, personal protective equipment use, and job intensity, ensure that employees shall be provided with at least 32 ounces of cool potable water per hour when exposed to heat above 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Supervisors shall implement adaptive break schedules based on project start times, physical intensity, personal protective equipment worn, and heat index. Breaks must align with the following minimum standards shown in the table below. So when you get to the actual table, this basically is a table that talks about heat ranges between 8 and 84.9 degrees, 85 and 89.9 degrees, 90 and 100 degrees, and then over 100. And then the classifications of work, light work, moderate work, and heavy work are columns. And if, for instance, if you look, when somebody's doing light work, you're not required to have designated breaks after a certain amount of time working, but you're still required to provide the water for them. When you get into moderate work, there's no rest period required for 80 to 84 or 85 to 89, but you still have to have 3 quarts of water available per hour. When the temperature gets over 90 degrees, you do a rest period every 50 minutes, or you can't work any more than 50 minutes, and you rest for 10 minutes. And when the temperature gets up over 100 degrees, you can work no more than 40 minutes in succession with a rest period of 20 minutes. And then if you look at the chart for heavy work, it follows the same outline for that. You're also supposed to add 5 degrees when personal protective equipment is worn. The supervisor needs to verify all employees have completed annual heat illness prevention training, identify and monitor new, returning, or high-risk employees during acclimatization periods, provide access to shaded or air-conditioned recovery areas, example, work vehicles, keep records of hydration schedules, training, and incident responses, conduct daily check-ins when temperature exceeds 90 degrees Fahrenheit using a buddy system, cell phone, or other communication method. Number two, the rights of employees and responsibilities. Employees may take unscheduled cool-down breaks if experiencing symptoms without fear of reprisal. B, all employees are responsible for recognizing early signs of heat stress and notifying a supervisor. C, all employees shall be encouraged to stay hydrated and rest as needed, especially in extreme conditions. Number three, emergency response and cross-reference. Section 2-1M of this manual, general employee conduct, requires that all accidents and injuries be reported immediately. Supervisors shall activate the emergency procedures outlined in the town's heat stress management plan, including on-site evaluation, immediate calling of the individual, calling 911 if symptoms escalate, example, confusion or collapse, transport to emergency services if necessary. B, emergency procedures must be posted at all job sites, and employees must be trained in recognizing and responding to heat cramps, heat exhaustion, heat stroke. Supervisors shall ensure direct communication access, example, cell phones, is available on all job sites. 4, training and education. All affected employees must complete annual heat illness prevention training. B, training covers symptoms, risk factors, emergency procedures, and acclimatization. Rest and recovery locations. Employees may recover in air-conditioned vehicles or shaded areas as designated by the supervisor. Supervisors are responsible for ensuring sufficient access to recovery spaces. Number 6, acclimatization procedures. Employees shall be monitored during the first 14 days on the job, after 7+ days off, or during heat wave conditions 10 degrees Fahrenheit above recent 5-day average. Training will address the risk associated with personal protective equipment, underlying health conditions, and clothing. 7, emergency protocols. Emergency procedures must be posted and covered in training. All staff must have access to a phone and are permitted to call 911 for heat-related incidents without penalty. Supervisors must monitor employees for symptoms of heat-related illness and respond accordingly. So again, this is an effort, obviously, to make sure that our employees are safe, especially our public works employees or even police officers that are out on crowd control or something during hot days. We want to make sure that everybody is safe, and this is consistent with newly refined OSHA and MOSH guidelines. So that's the resolution that we're recommending that you ratify and adopt.
Could I get a motion to approve this
So moved.
resolution?
Seconded?
It's been moved and seconded. Want to thank Judy and Calvin for all their work in this and making sure that we're up to date and in compliance. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes,
Aye.
thank you. Thank you, Augie, got you. Proposed ordinance 2025-02, which is the floodplain code. Do you have that?
Yes, I do. So this is 2025-02, which is an ordinance to make modifications to our floodplain ordinance. It is a 50-page document. I do not plan on reading the entire thing. However, I'll give you the salient points. Before I do that, this is a document that will sit. It's not a document that we're recommending be passed as an emergency ordinance because we already have a floodplain management code in place. However, our floodplain management ordinance is based upon the model ordinance that the state of Maryland Department of MDE, or Maryland Department of the Environment, MDE, puts out in response to FEMA regulations on floodplains. And so they make it easy for communities to not have to create an ordinance from scratch, so they develop a model code. And again, I think what's important for people to realize is that you are, as a community, you are able to participate in national flood insurance if your property is prone in areas to flooding, only if your community enforces FEMA regulations or floodplain regulations in areas in your community that are in floodplain areas. And we do have a swath of area that comes down basically from the Legion Post through in and around Buck's Restaurant, jumps over, runs next to the car wash, and then runs along the stream all the way out to Walnut Street, affects the trailer park that we remember was flooding, goes under Mount Street, and then passes by the into the Reynolds farm field there, and then out on the Route 1 there. So it's a big area, but it doesn't cover a large portion of the town. And fortunately, there's a lot of area that doesn't have any construction in it, but there are areas that do. And so we are required to keep our floodplain ordinance up to date. And the way we do that is to modify it whenever the state comes out with a new model ordinance. And they did come out with a new model ordinance in 2018. So I'm just going to skim through here the boilerplate language on, the third boilerplate language regarding Chapter 10, where it's at, what its purpose is, and how you change it. And that the fourth boilerplate, the town desires to maintain participation in the National Flood Insurance Program. This is important. If we don't do this, people in our community that need or rely upon flood insurance can have that revoked because the town is not actively enforcing floodplain regulations. So it's not the town that needs to participate in the floodplain insurance program. It's to enable our residents to be able to participate in that. So you get into the actual changes in the code. When you start on page 5, everything that is in black is the existing language. Things that are changed are in red and underlined if it's new language, and then strike through is text that's been removed. So just to give you an example, the first one, this is really not a big deal, but when our floodplain code was adopted back in 2014, the state of Maryland referenced the zoning regulations as Article 66B. That has since been changed and replaced by new nomenclature of the land use article. So all that's doing is properly referencing the state statute that has to be mentioned in here. You see there's a lot of areas that are not changed. There's some subtle things that had to be changed because when the town adopted our ordinance back in 2014, the Maryland Department of the Environment did all the field work to give to us. But when they referenced sections of the code, they referenced the sections in the model code and not the town code. So for instance, if you look at this first one, they're referring you back to section 1.5. That 1.5 is in the model code. So you would have to look up our town code to see that we're actually calling it section 10-104. So as you're going through the document, you'll see all the instances where we've made those changes here. There are a couple things that we had to provide some definitions for, and one of them I want to introduce to you is the Code Enforcement Appeals Board definition. If you remember a couple months ago, the town of Rising Sun, because of our involvement in building inspections and rental and property maintenance, by law, we're required to create an appeals board to give people the right to appeal a decision of a code officer. And so we created a Code Enforcement Appeals Board, and in that document that we created, we structured it so that the Code Enforcement Appeals Board could be used for appeals of any types of things out there. And so you're going to see when this code was originally created, the Maryland Department of the Environment just said, well, the town has a planning commission, it has a mayor and commissioners, and it has a board of zoning appeals. Let's just reference the Board of Zoning Appeals as the one to handle any requests for variances or appeals. We have since rationalized in our mind that the Zoning Board of Appeals, their skill set is more in terms of zoning language, where a lot of the appeals that would take place here are more of a building construction type thing. So when a board would be hearing appeals, somebody's talking about building and construction and wood and lumber and loading and stuff like that. It's more engineering. And our Code Enforcement Board of Appeals is made up of people that have skill sets that are more closely aligned to that. So we think it's a better product not only for the applicant but for the town to maintain the integrity of the system, to change the name of who the board that will hear those appeals from the Board of Zoning Appeals to the Code Enforcement Appeals Board. So that's the reason for that definition. You will also see throughout the document wherever the Board of Appeals is mentioned, there's a strike through and Code Enforcement Board of Appeals is put in there. This one here, definition, this is an example of when the Department of the Environment updated their model code, they added more definitions, so we needed to add those definitions in here also. So you see mixed-use structures, the other one I just showed you. The only thing that's, a couple things that we put in here is there's a term called substantial improvement and substantial damage. And what that basically means is that when a property is located in a floodplain area, and the best way I can describe this is that buildings, for whatever reason, end up in floodplain areas. Sometimes it's because they were built long before anybody officially designated it as a floodplain area. And then other times they end up there because maybe people were not paying any attention and they were allowed to build in a floodplain area. But the federal government and FEMA, the experts in this area, have said we can't keep having these storms come along and potentially people dying or property damage resulting because people are located where they really shouldn't be because of flooding and natural disasters. And so what the federal government did many, many years ago in the regulations was basically say that if a building or a structure is in the floodplain and it incurs more than 50% damage based upon the appraised value of the property cannot be fixed in its current location. It would have to be brought up to code, which would mean elevating it. Or in some cases, if you're in a flood zone, you can elevate it. If you're in a floodway, the building has to be removed in its entirety. And so the state has updated their definitions on substantial improvement. But here's another thing that the federal government provided for, which is new, is that, just to be bluntly honest, sometimes landlords or people that own would, if they incurred 50% damage, they would stretch it out over a period of time. Or they would say, hey, here's my permit to fix this. That in itself is not over 50%. So I haven't exceeded the limit. So the federal government started realizing that that's an unintended loophole. So they left it up to municipalities to either have just substantial improvement, or they could do 2, 5, 10, 15, upwards of 20 to 25 years of a cumulative effect. So that would mean that a landlord or a property owner who had a property that was, let's say, appraised at $100,000, if they came in and did a building permit for $25,000 one year, and then 2 years later came back with a building permit for $26,000, they're over the 50% threshold, but they would say, hey, it wasn't, you didn't have a code that said it was cumulative. So we're creating cumulative language, and the staff is recommending between 2, 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25 that we make it 5. Because we feel that 10, 15, and 20 is going to be too onerous of the property owner in that case. We think that 2 years is too short. We think 5 years is the sweet spot here. So this language is basically saying that those repairs that you make and upgrades that you make, they accumulate over a 5-year period portion of time. And if that total exceeds 50%, then you have to bring the property up to code. I think it's important for everyone listening is that this is not, sometimes we think it is, a government overreach in terms of the town of Rising Sun to just charge building permits or just do whatever. This is not something that applies to any other property. This applies to properties that are in what has been designated as a very dangerous area because of flooding. And so by doing this, you're mitigating the probability of somebody getting hurt. And that somebody getting hurt is not always just the occupant of the building, it's your volunteer firefighters that come out to respond, it's your police department, it's the neighbor who sees flooding and goes to help the elderly woman and they get electrocuted or they drown or something happens because of it. So these provisions are for areas that are considered to be very vulnerable and have a high risk of injury and damage. The other thing that is clear here is that, and this protects the property owner, the code department can't go to a property in a flood area and say, your gutter's bad, and then come back 3 weeks later and say, your front deck has to be fixed, all those property maintenance things. If somebody is required to fix something as a result of a code violation, that is not included in the mathematical calculation of 50%. It's only if the property owner does it voluntarily on their own or if it's a result of damage for any reason. It could be damaged by a tree, it could be damaged by a fire, it could be damaged by a flood. But it protects the property owner from the code department saying, I don't like that down there, so I'm going to nickel and dime you with a bunch of code violations to get you over the 50%. So that's a protection that's built in there. Other than that, there are no other substantial changes other than the definitions and requirements that the federal government said we had to put in there. To recap, the significant changes are the 5-year cumulative evaluation of substantial damage and the changing the appeals process from the Board of Zoning Appeals to the Code Enforcement Board of Appeals. Other than that, everything is just what we're required to do for the model code. Again, we have to send this to the Maryland Department of the Environment for their review, so it won't come back to you until MDE is signed off on the recommended updates. So that we're just starting the clock by introducing it tonight.
Thank you. All right, moving forward into citizens' input. Would anyone like to speak this evening?
Do I get some, not good?
Hello, Mayor, Commissioners. I did not plan on speaking this evening, so my unprepared remarks are, one, my name is Chris Comer. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for Comcast. As you know, we're expanding our network in the parts of Cecil County, and we look forward to serving the town of Rising Sun. As we go through this process, I shared a draft agreement with the town. It's based on the same agreement that we used in Perryville and Port Deposit, so consistent with all of those. I'm happy to answer any questions you have as you have time to review that, or come back for a meeting as needed. And then the project itself, there's a lot of work that goes into it, such as getting the franchise agreement to be in the town's right of way, but also working with utility owners to be able to attach to their poles. Sometimes that requires make-ready requirement to those poles. A lot of engineering that goes into that before we can actually start work. So we'll be working, but you may not see us working for a while. But as we get closer to working in the town, I'm happy to come back and bring someone from our construction department before we start doing anything to help answer any questions you have or set expectations, let you know where we'll be working on certain days and kind of keep you up to date. And obviously, if there's ever any constituent issues, I'm here to help as well. So I'll leave some business cards. If anyone has questions over the next few weeks or months, by all means, feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
And it's nice to meet everyone.
Nice
Thank
to
you
meet
for
as well.
coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it.
All right, moving forward in the staff reports, Town Administrator.
Yeah, one of the things that I would like to touch on is we did, on behalf of the town, I did participate in an interview with NPR regarding the BRIC funding, and I want to make sure that we eliminate some misconceptions that might be out there. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback regarding the interview. Basically, what it comes down to is the town, and you've heard me talk about this, the town is facing an unfunded mandate to comply with MS4 requirements. And that basically was reducing the town's nutrient footprint. And I've always compared that to the carbon footprint. We're required to reduce the nutrient footprint. And we had an estimated cost of like $1.75, $2 million to do that. Technically, that has to be done by December of 2025. We are one of many communities in the state of Maryland that have told the state it was an unfunded mandate. We don't have the money to do it on it. In addition to that, the town, as you know, built a brand-new wastewater treatment plant back in 2016, and it decommissioned a 10-acre lagoon down there on site. And we actually got a benefit from MDE because the cost of that wastewater treatment plant was $16 million. I always remind everybody it's the same technology that could have been done in 1997 for like $1.2 million, but it cost $16 million by the time we did it in 2012. But in order to decommission the lagoon at that time, it was estimated that we would have to spend about another $3 million on top of the $16 million to decommission the lagoon. MDE allowed us to keep the lagoon in its current footprint as long as it didn't become an issue, but we had to decommission it at some point in time. So what the town had set out to do was to qualify for the MS4 requirement we have by decommissioning the lagoon and turning the lagoon area into a wetlands buffer to deal with all the water runoff that comes off the farmers' fields behind the sewer plant. Now, what people don't realize is when you talk about reducing the nutrient footprint, the nutrient footprint is basically all the stuff that gets into the waterway that the environmental folks think has a negative impact on aquatic life and stuff like that. And so that could be grass clippings, it could be motor oil from your car, it could be fertilizers, it could be lots of things. And guess what comes off farmers' fields is that kind of stuff. And so what we, and it's not that the farmer's in violation, I'm not suggesting that they're in violation, but that drainage goes into the stream next to the lagoon. And what we would have done would to be spent like $2 million on rehabbing the stream to be better equipped with dealing with any other contaminants that get into the stream. Basically rehabbing the stream so that it becomes a filtration system to stop stuff from getting into the aquatic life, down further south. So when we had the ability to decommission the lagoon and check off that box of $3 million, we could turn it into a wetlands buffer. And so in essence, we would be able to decommission the lagoon and satisfy the wetlands buffer at the same time. So what also came up afterwards is, for whatever reason, and what I think is actually going on is that when we used to operate our lagoon and we put sewage in it and it naturally went through its process, it always had an effluent coming out the other side. So it would go through its biological process, go out the other side, so the level of the lagoon always stayed constant. Well, when we decommissioned the lagoon, we had to block off that effluent pipe. And so then you ask yourself, well, if it's blocked off, what stops the lagoon from rising? Well, when you have rainwater coming into it, hypothetically, you could say, well, that might be an issue. But not to belabor the point, but when you factor in not Mother Nature in general, the size of the pond itself, rainwater falling into it evaporates over time at a much greater rate than what would be able to overflow out into the stream or overflow its banks. But what we realized shortly after opening up the sewer plant, which never would have materialized while the lagoon was open, is an underground stream or an underground spring. And anyone who's been around here knows that when you went up on that upper bend, that bank was always wet. So there's an underground spring going in there that's raising the level of the lagoon, and we have to pump that out and pump it back into the wastewater treatment plant, which is not a very efficient use of equipment, electricity, so forth and so on. So that was the other benefit of decommissioning the lagoon, for cost savings to our residents down the road and greater efficiency. But with that underground spring there, we are now seeing where there's a lot of stuff coming off the farmers' fields that's actually just cascading right into the lagoon. And you remember the videos I showed you of the tropical storm in 2021, another one in July of 2022, and then a third one a couple months ago, where we have rainwater coming off the land around us into the lagoon, and it potentially overflows, which puts, hypothetically, a hazardous material or unsanitary material out into the stream. So the BRIC funding that we were applying for, and the terminology used, was to stop the lagoon from overflowing and putting that bad stuff out in the environment. That is everything that BRIC funding was designed for. The current administration, in trying to cut wasteful spending in the federal government, decided to just defund the entire BRIC funding program. So even though we were essentially awarded $5.5 million, that money was taken away from us. And so the crust of the interview was basically that we understand the motivation behind making those cuts, and we all, as individual citizens, realize that there's probably a lot of wasteful spending being done in the federal government. So the town of Rising Sun was not jumping up as a victim saying, oh, poor us, you took our money, you shouldn't have done it. We're in support of what the federal government is trying to do, but we think there was an unintended consequence in the way they did it. And that's what I had said in my interview. I wish they would have used a surgeon's scalpel instead of a dull butcher knife to cut the fat out. So that's the town's official position. We're in support of what the motivation was. We just are going to need other solutions. We want to work with the federal government to try to find other solutions. Otherwise, we're still facing these unfunded mandates, potential sewer overflowing. So we've reached out to the federal government to try to resolve that. But what has gotten twisted over the last 2 weeks is a mindset in the community that we were doing the brick funding because our wastewater treatment plant was at capacity and we could not treat wastewater. They're apples and oranges. There's, for all intents and purposes, there's 2 wastewater treatment plants down there. One that's been abandoned and decommissioned, which is a pond that's overflowing, and another one that is fully functioning and is a functioning above and beyond environmental standards. There's no issue with that. So I want to make sure that people don't continue with this misnomer that we applied for grant money to get more capacity so we could simply allow more development to come into the community. So I just wanted an opportunity to address that misnomer out there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chief?
I'm going to be brief. 2 things I have. Recently, I put out an inquiry on social media about employment and letting people know we're hiring. Within a 36-hour period, I've received 17 inquiries. Hopefully, we can get some quality candidates out of this. My estimation and experience, I think that'll drop down to about 50% real quick. Then they will slowly weed down to maybe we'll get 2 or 3 that we can put through an academy. So hope that goes well, and we can continue to get, inquiries about employment for a police officer. Second, as the weather starts to get warm, we start to get more foot traffic throughout town. We will be pushing enforcement of the crosswalks. There's a lot of concern about children and people just crossing the roads, especially along 273. Under Maryland law, if a person is in a crosswalk, all vehicle traffic must stop and allow them to cross. And we will be holding you all to the letter of the law in that. If a person steps into the crosswalk, you need to stop. So the officers have been instructed to take action if they see violations of that nature, and we'll be out and about doing that. And that is my report unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Chief. Moving forward in the mayor's report, it is also brief. Wanted to give a huge shout out to the Rising Sun High School lacrosse team, the baseball team, and the softball team. They are all in the regional championships. They have won the regional championships and are going on to the next round. So we want to give them a huge shout out. As president of the Maryland Mayors Association, we hosted a reception for the If I Were a Mayor essay contest. We had our first winner from Rising Sun in about 5 years, Raylan Kennedy. It was great to visit with her and all of the other winners from throughout the state. The First Lady came and presented proclamations on behalf of the governor's office. It was just a great event. Last but not least, I wanted to just take a moment to address, obviously, the sad news that we're hearing of the 2 businesses that are closing on our Main Street. We know as a board that times are tough and that inflation continues to drive up the cost of just about everything. But that is not just an economic shift, it's something personal for these businesses. And to the owners and staff, we want to thank them for taking a part and being a part of our Main Street story, for being a part of our town, and we wish them nothing but success in their future endeavors. That concludes my report. Moving forward into the commissioners' reports. Commissioner Kleiner.
I wanted to report on the Planning Commission meeting that we had last Thursday. It was a great success, I think, very well run. It was well attended by members of the public, which we love to see. And there was great discussion. There were very thoughtful questions asked of members of the board and the public. And I believe that it went as smoothly as we could have wished. So thank you to everybody who prepared for that. Thank you to Jay for being the hearing officer, and we're very excited about what we pushed forward, which was the preliminary and final plans for Stevens Preserve, and we look forward to hearing more from those parties as well. So that concludes my report.
Thank you, Commissioner Kleiner. Commissioner Warnick.
I'll be brief. On Earth Day, we had numerous 6th graders from Rising Sun Middle School who cleaned trails at Veterans Community Park and planted flowers in Town Hall. I'd like to thank Public Works, Juanita and Mrs. DeCoursey for their help with that, and thank the mayor for attending that event and
All right,
keeping everybody in line.
thank you.
Thank you.
Town administrator?
No, I'm good.
Good,
Did
okay.
you forget about me?
Oh, yeah, sorry, Augie. Augie,
That seems to be a common theme tonight.
go ahead.
I'll be brief also. Just a reminder, it's getting warm. Little League is up and going. We're going to have more foot traffic in town. So please, please be aware of people, young children especially, moving around. Just be cautious. That's the end of my report.
I'll make sure to remind Juanita about that, Augie. As you can see on the agenda, we have our yard waste and upcoming town events and holidays, as well as the Board of Zoning Appeals and Planning Commission schedule. Is there anything else to come before the board this evening? Hearing nothing, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.